And this kind of falls into the category of like test versus project because honestly, I can't think of a single circumstance in which you would be conducting a study related to medicine for a project for this class, right? Because that would require you to get subjects and then medicine and give them that medicine. I mean, there's so much wrong with that, right? So, but yeah, so but on a test, you would need to know things like what a placebo is, the placebo effect, the Hawthorne effect, and so on. Placebo effect is a dummy treatment, right? So that's the case where you have a group of individuals that are participating in an experiment related to whether or not a drug is effective. You break them up into two groups, the control group and the experimental group. The control group gets a placebo, which looks like, tastes like, feels like the real drug, just doesn't have the active ingredient in it. They call it a sugar tablet, but it's not, I mean, it may be made in some capacity out of sugar, but it doesn't taste like sugar, otherwise that would be a red flag. The individual taking it would be like, this tastes really sweet for oxycodone, so definitely not. But I would imagine if they're going to call it a sugar tablet, there's going to be some aspect of sugar in there. And then the experimental group that has the real drug, all right? The placebo is the group that gets that dummy treatment, that sugar tablet, right? The placebo effect, this is a really weird one to wrap your brain around. If you've taken a psych class, you probably discussed this there. A beneficial effect produced by a placebo drug or treatment that cannot be attributed to the properties of the placebo itself and must therefore be due to the patient's belief in that treatment. All right, so it's really a psychological response to whether or not a person's thinking that they're getting a treatment. All right, so you get a medicine, and that form of medicine, whatever it is supposed to help you. All right. Now, there's some kinds of medicines that are supposed to help you in terms of your autonomic responses to things. All right? And that's something that you wouldn't necessarily need a placebo for. If I'm testing the effectiveness of a blood pressure medicine, I don't need a placebo group or a control group. Well, I need a control group, but I don't need to trick people into thinking that they're taking a real drug when it's a fake drug, because all I have to do is measure their blood pressure, right? But if you're testing something like an antidepressant or a pain relieving medication or something along those lines, then a control group, including a placebo, might be the way to go, because an individual's perception is part of the evaluation. All right. So if we use that idea, then what we'd have to account for is the psychological component. All right. That sometimes a person will report that they're feeling better just because they're supposed to be feeling better. Now, it's kind of weird to wrap your brain around that part of it, because it seems like they're making a choice, but it's really an internal, kind of like an internal decision that's made without their awareness. So it's completely subconscious, right? Their body's telling them that they're feeling better because they're supposed to be feeling better, right? It's related to dopamine levels. And so one of the studies that was conducted by a professor at NYU was related to cell phone usage. And so apparently the dopamine levels are impacted based off of pleasure, right? So if you're an alcoholic or a drug addict or a Fortnite addict, or basically, and that was part of the study, or a phone addict, your dopamine levels are impacted based off of affecting your pleasure centers in your brain. And so what he did was he used a PET scanner and scanned the brains of a bunch of different people and developed controls, experimental groups, all that stuff. Right? And so one of the parts of the study was him putting somebody in the scanner, and then while they're in the scanner, so they're in there for a few minutes, he gets readings on their brain activity, their dopamine levels. Then he puts their phone in their hands and watched the dopamine levels go off the charts. All right, so like he was comparing it to a meth addict. All right, the dopamine levels were higher for placing a phone in a person's hand, their own phone specifically, had to be their own phone, than it was for that of a meth addict. All right. Now, what he also did for a different group of individuals was same scenario, put somebody else's phone in their hands. All right. So not your own phone with the textures that you're used to. Put somebody else's phone in their hands, no change in dopamine levels. So determined that it wasn't just phone addiction, it's they're addicted to their own phones. Right? Took their same phone, different group, took the same phone, the phone that belonged to the individual, took it out of its case, put it in their hands, no change in dopamine levels. All right? Indicating that it is the responsiveness to the fact that it is their own phone that caused them to have that change in dopamine levels. All right? So a lot of different ways in which the placebo effect comes into play here, because really you need some sort of control, but that perception, it happens in the brain, and it's something that's completely beyond a person's control. So when you tell a person, I just gave you Vicodin, it's an hour afterwards, how are you feeling? They might say, I mean, sometimes people are, difficult, and they'll say, well, you just gave me Vicodin, so I imagine I'm feeling better. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about the people who actually started feeling better because their brain made them start feeling better because they're supposed to start feeling better. All right? The placebo effect creates that beneficial effect, any beneficial effect that might happen because of the psychological impact of having taken any kind of drug. All right? Whether it's effective or not. So that creates the control, because that's an element of the medication, right? So if I take Percocet, but like as I'm taking that Percocet, part of the effect of me getting better, or well, not getting better, but becoming numb to the pain, would be the medication and how it's affecting my body, but also that psychological component that's caused by the autonomic response making me get better. All right, so this measures that effect so that when you're comparing it to the experimental group, you can see what part of that really is the Percocet and what part of it is really just related to the fact that the person's taking medicine in general. All right. Now the Hawthorne effect, that's a fun one. This is more of a sociological component. So if you think of placebo effect as psychological, then Hawthorne effect is sociological, right? So I'll make a note of that. Alteration of behavior by the subjects of a study due to their awareness of being observed, right? So they have different examples. Yeah, you could, and people make YouTube videos out of this stuff all the time. But basically that's the case of, teacher thinks that playing classical music in a math class is going to improve test scores during a test. So what they do is they have two different math classes. In one class, they don't play any music. And in the other class, they play some classical music. So is that psychologically going to do anything? Not necessarily. Maybe. But maybe the student who wasn't going to take the assessment seriously, by knowing that they're going to be part of a study and that music is supposed to impact them, they may change their behavior. All right. Teachers do this all the time. Like, I don't know how recent high school was for some of you, but if you remember high school, you might remember some of those days where the principal came in and sat in the back of the room. And on those days, the teacher was always a little bit more like buttoned up and a little bit more precise with their language, a little bit more energetic and focused, and dog and pony show. The activity was a lot different than the way it normally was. That teacher was altering their behavior because they're part of a study, right? It was an observational study known as, shockingly, an observation, right? So it's the way the teachers are evaluated, right? At least in the high school level. Last time I was observed here, I think it was in the aughts, like 2009. Time before that, I think was like 2003. Yeah, I've been teaching here for 20 years. I've been observed twice. In high school, we get observed twice a year. So, like, just to put it in perspective, if somebody came into the classroom and sat in the back here, I'd be like, can I help you? Like, what are you here for? Oh, I'm here to observe. Oh, wow. That's a thing? You know, there it's like, oh, I know what you're here for. You know, so that's an example of the Hawthorne effect, because just by knowing that I'm part of a study, I'm going to change my behavior. Now, in the case with the classical music, it could be that, oh, I see what you're after. You think classical music is going to help me perform better in math. Well, I'll show you. 2 plus 2, 22 it is. Check. You know, so people do change it, because it's not always going to be an improvement of behavior. Sometimes people are just difficult. All right. But yeah, they do that in the workplace. Anytime they change your conditions, and I'm not even just talking about playing music, but like if you went to work one day and you saw a cheese platter in the break room, you go in there and you see a cheese and crackers, they're like, oh, what's this all about? Like, oh, the boss is being kind today. And they're like, every day for like a week it's there. They're like, okay, I'll help myself to some cheese. They're trying to improve morale, but they think by providing food that's what's going to happen, right? But you're part of a study. They just don't know that you're doing it using statistical techniques, right? But that's the Hawthorne effect, right? They're hoping that your behavior will change based off the fact that they've imposed some kind of condition to your workplace, right? So now everybody's going to start like second guessing all the little things that the boss does. Like there's a bucket of candy in our break room over there. Like in a little snack station. I think they call it the wellness station, but they have all sorts of candy and stuff there. So I don't know if it's for wellness, but we're all part of a study, because somebody thinks that providing all that stuff is going to make us happier, and if we're happier, we're going to do a better job and things like that. I'm just happy for the snacks, you know, and I know who's in charge of that, so I know it's coming from a good place. So it's a little bit different, but you know, some people are manipulative and they do things like that for their own personal reasons. Blinding, subject does not know if he or she is receiving a treatment or a placebo. That's an important one, because if I'm getting a placebo related to, let's say, pain medication or antidepressants and stuff like that, if I know that I'm getting the placebo, well, that could skew the whole study. Right? How are you feeling? Well, not good, because you gave me a placebo. Right? Is the antidepressant helping? No, because you gave me a placebo. Right? Is the antidepressant helping? Yeah, because you gave me an antidepressant. You know, so like, that's just how people are. So we blind it so that you can get more honesty in their answer. Now, nothing's foolproof, because an individual can get the placebo and then make a prediction. Forget what movie, I'll have to find, I'll look for it later. But there was a movie where the guy was like, I'm in the control group. I know I'm always in the control group. You know, and it was part of a comedy, I forget which one it was, but I'll find it, it was a funny clip. And sometimes that's the case. You know, you see the person giving out medication, and you're like, all right, it seems like you're giving the purple pills to those people, the green pills to those people, the purple pills, all right. Green means go means go for medication. So if I get the purple one, it's definitely the placebo. P, purple, placebo, I'm in the control group. You know, so sometimes people overthink things, and they can kind of get around the blinding, and so that can impact things. Right? Sometimes we double blind it so that we just add a little extra layer of protection to the whole thing, where the person giving out the drugs doesn't even know who's getting what. Right? Because sometimes the mannerisms of the people, they don't even realize they're doing it, but the mannerisms of the people giving out the medication can dictate who's getting what. You know, it's not quite as obvious as like, here's your placebo, here's your, it could be something like, you know, something very simple, you know. For me, my blinding has to do with tests in my Algebra 1 class. I give out 2 different versions of the test, right? So I blind them so that they don't know who's getting what, because I don't want them looking around the room looking for all the other version A's, all right? Because it's like, all right, well, he normally, so I'm a version A, he normally puts the version A's there and there. So that's where I don't even have to look there and there. If I'm gonna cheat, I gotta get over there and I gotta get over there. And so I don't even bother doing that. I'm just, I shuffle them up before I hand out the test, and then I'm just passing them out, right? So I'm a little bit more careful. Double blinding would be that I didn't even know who was getting what, which I guess is fine. But then if one person's trying to look at another person's paper during a test, I don't know if they're wasting their time or if they're getting answers, right? So double blinding wouldn't make sense in that situation, but I suppose I could get away with it, right? So you might wonder, how does it work if a study was double blinded? Like, how would they keep track of what? The idea is that there's a researcher, an administrator, and then the recipients of the medication. So if you have a list, a clipboard with a list of names, and on those names you have assigned numerical values. Those numerical values would correspond to control or experimental group. So like you have the little medicine cups on the bottom, you have the numbers 1 through whatever. And on your chart, you know that patient number 1 is getting a control, patient number 7 is getting the experimental. You randomly select, and all the administrator gets is the person, the name of the person, and the number. They just don't know what it means, and all the medicine looks exactly the same. They're blinded, they don't know who's getting what, so they're not going to subconsciously change their mannerisms, and the person receiving it won't know what they're getting. The only person that does is the researcher, right? So the data is collected at least with a little bit more accuracy, all right? And again, nothing's foolproof because there's always a person they're trying to figure out the secret to the whole thing. They're like, oh, he looked at me funny, I'm in the control group, right? So there's always that part of it. And I've seen it firsthand. So it's something that you definitely you want to keep in mind. But it's, like I said, it's just an extra layer of protection, all right? The rest of the terms here, they're pretty straightforward. Fortunately, we're kind of in the territory of things that kind of tell you what they are. Exploratory data analysis is exactly what it sounds like. You're analyzing data in an exploratory fashion. I don't know what's going to come of this. I just know that I'm interested in the subject, so I'm going to collect some data and see where it goes. Right? And if you do a paper or a project, you might go into it that way. And so that one question that says, what is your hypothesis? You might say, I have no hypothesis because this is an exploratory data analysis. I'm going into this completely blind. I don't know what to expect. Formal statistical inference, you have specific questions you'd like to have answers to, and you're going to prove or disprove those things. In that case, you should have a hypothesis, right? So no hypothesis necessary, hypothesis absolutely necessary, all right? So no thing is so hard to write out. All right. You have 2 different types of error, sampling error and non-sampling error. Those are terms that really don't define themselves except to say that they're types of errors. Errors that occur as results in the survey process. sampling, you can sample through a survey, you could sample in other ways, but most of the time people sample through a survey. And in fact, the term survey is kind of a misleading one, because most of the time you think of it as a pencil paper. Here's a sheet of paper, answer these questions, that's your survey. But anytime you're collecting data from individuals, you are surveying them. I can survey a group of people for their vitals. All right, so getting blood pressure, heart rate, body temperature, height and weight, and things like that. That is still a survey. You don't need the individual to respond to individual questions, but you're collecting information from those individuals. Any error that occurs in that process is going to be sampling error. Right? My example for that is, I'm going to keep going back to blood pressure because that's off the top of my head, because you have a nurse that comes in that is taking your blood pressure and comes up with 165 over 110, and then types it in the computer and says, okay, the doctor will be with you any minute now. Now, anybody who knows anything about blood pressure knows 165 over 110, that's not a, okay, doctor will be with you any minute. That's a, whoa, we got a problem here. You know, so the doctor comes in, takes a look at the computer and says, whoa, let me measure that again. And then does it correctly and comes up with like 115 over like 85 or whatever it was. It was something like incredibly good. Right? So the data was collected incorrectly. Right? Then you have individuals who come in and they say, all right, which arm do you normally have your blood pressure taken from? And then others that don't care. They just, whatever arm is nearest to the machine, they do. Right? So the problem with that is different arms give different blood pressure. Right? So the cardiologist wants the dominant hand. So if you're righty, they want blood pressure from the right arm because that's the one that's used most frequently. All right? Everybody else seems to want the one that's closest to the thing on the wall. Right? The problem with that is if the last 20 times you had your blood pressure taken, it was from the left arm, and now somebody comes in and takes it from the right arm, it's going to give you skewed data. Right? So doctor comes in and says, whoa, that's way different from every other time we took it. Let me try the other arm. Ah, there it is. Right? So that's sampling error. Now, in the case of left arm versus right arm, nothing was done incorrectly. It was just done inconsistently. All right? So there needs to be consistency in the approach that's taken. All right? So if you're taking somebody's temperature orally, and then somebody comes along and does it through the ear, or, you know, like an infant. I won't describe the other one, but yeah.
The forehead too.
Yeah, we'll go with that. That's exactly what I meant, the forehead. Yes, precisely. Yeah, you're going to get variation in the readings. All right, so these are things that come from the survey process, not always due to mistakes, but that's usually what happens most of the time. We saw an example earlier of poorly worded questions. And so if you have a pencil paper survey, if your questions just are not easily understood by the reader, if they can't understand what the intent of the question is, then you're not going to get accuracy in your survey responses. Non-sampling errors, that's the easiest one to identify. That's basically any other error that can occur in the survey process. Right? So you came up with a well-designed survey. You gave somebody a pencil paper survey, asked them for their biographical, maybe some vital information, things like that, demographical stuff. And, you know, like you're just compiling all the information. They wrote everything correctly. There was nothing wrong with the way you structured the questions. Everything made sense. It's just for whatever reason, when you were typing it into an Excel spreadsheet, their age 27 somehow became 28, 22, whatever. It was a typo. You made a mistake, right? That's non-sampling error, right? There was nothing wrong with the sampling process. It's just something that you did with the responses that was incorrect, all right? Something with the analysis that was incorrect, right? So literally, really any other error that could occur after you've already collected the data, assuming the data was collected correctly, all right? So data, this is error in the data collection process. So that's sampling error. Error after data collection. All right, so the people participating in the study did nothing wrong. You're the one that screwed up. So let's take a quick break. This is page 46.